Chapter 1. Under Sealed Orders. "Now, Frank, tell us the news," one boy said eagerly. "Yes, you promised to tell us something exciting," another boy added. "Frank, you look so happy. What's going on?" asked the third boy. 3 boys stood around Frank Langdon waiting for him to speak. Frank smiled and laughed. "Okay, I'll tell you everything now," Frank said. "Sit down, everyone. Are you ready?" "We can't wait," said Bluff, whose real name was Richard Masters. "Tell us quickly," said Jerry Wallington. "Please go on," begged Will Milton. "Well, you know our Christmas vacation is coming up," Frank began. "We will have 2 full weeks off from school." "Yes, because the steam heater broke down," Will said. "But we already know that. Tell us the big news." "I was thinking about what we could do during the vacation. Remember old Jesse Wilcox, the trapper? He invited us to stay with him and see how he traps animals in the cold. We were planning to go, but then something happened." "What happened?" asked Bluff. "I got a letter that changed my mind," Frank replied. "Not from Jesse?" Jerry asked. "No, Jesse can't write letters. This letter was from my cousin Archie Dunn. You met him last year when he visited us." "Oh, I remember him," said Will. "Archie is a few years older than us, and he's rich. He loves outdoor adventures like we do. He bought a small motorboat, and he planned to take a long trip with it this winter. But then he had an accident. He fell through the ice while skating and got very sick with pneumonia." "Poor Archie," said Bluff. "Yes, it's sad. But here's where it gets interesting for us. Archie can't go on his trip now, so he asked me to take his boat on the trip instead." "What?" the boys shouted. "He wants us to take the boat down a river in northern Florida and sail it to Cedar Keys, Florida. It's a trip he had planned, but now we can do it for him," Frank explained. "Oh, wow. That's amazing," said Will. "Yes, and the best part is, Archie said we can all go. There are enough beds on the boat for everyone," Frank added with a smile. The boys were so excited. Jerry hugged Bluff, and Will shook Frank's hand. "This is the best news ever," Jerry exclaimed. "But what about our parents? Will they let us go?" asked Will. "Don't worry," Frank said. "I've already talked to your parents, and they all said yes, we can go." The boys couldn't believe it. It felt like a dream. "When do we leave?" asked Bluff, ready to go right away. "In 2 days," Frank answered. "School ends tomorrow, and we leave the next morning. We have to get ready quickly." "This is incredible," Will said. "But Frank, why was your dad so happy about us going to Cedar Keys?" "That's a mystery," Frank replied. "My dad gave me a sealed envelope and told me not to open it until we see Cedar Keys. Inside are instructions for something he wants me to do." The boys looked at each other in surprise. "Wow, this just keeps getting better," Jerry said. "Yes," Frank agreed. "Now, let's get ready for the trip." Chapter 2. Caught in a Fire Trap. It was very late at night when the 3 visitors thought about going home. They had so much to talk about that they did not want to leave. "Listen," exclaimed Will as they were about to go. "That's the fire bell. It's ringing," cried Bluff. "Can you believe it?" said Jerry. "It's a cold night to have a fire." Frank quickly put on his coat and cap. "I'm going with you fellows to see if it's a real fire or just a false alarm," Frank said. The four boys rushed out of the door and ran down the street. There was snow on the ground, and the air was very cold. "It's a real fire. Look, you can see the light and the smoke," said Will. "Hey, isn't that the square? And doesn't it look like the Sherman house is on fire?" asked Frank. "It sure does," replied Bluff. "That would be terrible. People might have to climb out in the middle of the night when it's freezing cold." "Hurry! Maybe we can help," said Jerry, who had a kind heart. They ran even faster. It was the hotel, no doubt about it. As the boys reached the square, they saw a scene of chaos that shocked them. Smoke was pouring out of the lower windows of the big wooden building, and in some places, flames were starting to burn the dry wood. "That hotel is going to burn down," said Jerry grimly. They saw people running out of the building, some of them in their night clothes, with blankets wrapped around them. Luckily, there were only a few guests in the hotel because most people visited in the summer. Loud shouts told them that the local fire company was coming with their fire engine. The chemical company might also come, but it was too late to save the hotel. The firemen could only try to protect the nearby buildings, but none of them were very close to the hotel. Frank and his friends thought they might help with pumping water or something like that. In a small town, everyone helps at a fire. Some people carry out furniture, others work the fire engine. The regular firemen get to carry the hose and break windows. Finally, the water started. By then, one end of the building was completely on fire. Everyone knew the hotel would be destroyed before the flames were out. The boys were standing near some people who had come out of the hotel. One of them was the hotel owner. He looked very upset as he watched his hotel burn, but he seemed relieved to know he had insurance. Just then, a man came limping over to the hotel owner. "Have you seen my brother, the professor?" the man asked, his voice shaking. "Oh, is that you, Mr. Smythe? Your brother?" "No, I don't remember seeing him. But I think everyone got out safely." "He must be around here somewhere," replied the hotel owner. "I've asked a dozen people and no one has seen him. I tell you, my brother is still asleep in his room and he's going to burn to death," Mr. Smythe cried. Jerry recognized Mr. Smythe. He was a very lame man who walked with difficulty. His brother, a famous balloonist, had been visiting him. But because of an illness at Mr. Smythe's house, the brother was staying at the hotel. No one could sleep through all this noise. "And we haven't seen anyone at the windows, have we, boys?" the hotel owner said. "You don't understand. My brother hasn't slept for several nights, so he took a strong sleeping powder before he left me tonight. He said it would make him sleep like the dead for 8 hours. He's still in his room and someone has to go save him," Mr. Smythe cried. "Which room is his, Mr. Ten Eyck?" asked Jerry eagerly. The hotel owner looked at Jerry, surprised. "See that window over there at the end of the house on the 3rd floor? That's his room. But the stairs must be on fire by now. It would be suicide to try to go up there," he cried. "Come on, Frank. Let's go check it out," shouted Jerry. He ran off, and Frank followed just as excited. Frank was usually a calm person who thought carefully before taking risks, but he knew that they had to take some chances if they wanted to save the sleeping balloonist. They looked into the front door. The whole place was on fire. "Get out of the way, boys, we're putting the hose in there," shouted one of the firemen as he approached. "No chance here," said Frank, backing away in despair. Jerry grabbed Frank's arm. "Come with me." "The back stairs might not be on fire yet. They're on the safer side of the building. There's a chance," he panted. Half a minute later, they turned the corner and reached the back exit. "Look, there's smoke coming out, but no fire yet. Should we risk it?" asked Jerry eagerly. Frank quickly looked around. He was thinking fast, trying to make sure they wouldn't do something too dangerous. "It's worth a try. At the worst, we can jump into that tree from the window, and it's horrible to think of the professor sleeping until he's trapped. Lead the way, Jerry. You know the place better than I do. Remember, the 3rd floor and turn to the left." They darted in. Some people nearby shouted at them to stop, but the boys didn't hear. They were already rushing up the narrow stairs. Smoke filled the air, making their eyes sting. They had to rub their eyes often to see where they were going. They reached the first landing, and Jerry turned to the left. Frank held on to Jerry's coat so they wouldn't get separated in the smoky building. Jerry knew where they were going. Now they were on the 2nd flight of stairs. A burst of red fire further down the hall showed them the way. They stumbled up the stairs and reached the 3rd floor. Again, Jerry turned to the left. "He said the last room, didn't he?" Jerry gasped. "Yes, go on," answered Frank, still holding on to Jerry's coat. "Here's the door." "Is it shut?" "Yes, and it's locked." "What do we do?" exclaimed Jerry. "Kick it in, any way we can, but we have to be quick," answered Frank. They threw themselves against the door. It quickly broke open under their force. They pushed into the room. The smoke had started to come in, but it wasn't as bad as in the hallway because the door had been closed. They saw a figure lying on the bed. The balloonist had fallen asleep before he could even take off his clothes. He had collapsed on the bed just as he came from his brother's house. "Wake up, Professor! The house is on fire!" Frank shouted in the man's ear. Jerry was shaking the man hard, but nothing seemed to work. The man slept on peacefully, like a baby. The drug he took was very strong. "We can't stay here long," Frank said, as the smoke in the room grew thicker. "If he won't wake up, we'll have to carry or drag him out." Luckily, the man wasn't very big, or they might not have been able to carry him. "Grab that side, Jerry. Now lift him and drag his heels. It's the only way we can do this," Frank said, worried that even their short stay in the room might have made things worse in the hallway. The professor didn't notice what they were doing. He had probably taken too much of the sleeping powder. If the boys hadn't come, he would have died in the fire, like a rat trapped in a cage. When Frank opened the door again, he gasped in fear. The back stairway was covered in flames. In just 2 minutes, the fire had spread and it was impossible to go down that way. Frank slammed the door shut and looked at Jerry in the dim light. "That fire is worse than anything I've ever seen," exclaimed Jerry, letting go of the professor's shoulders. "What do we do now?" Frank ran to the window and threw it open. He looked outside and then came back to Jerry, who was trembling with excitement. Frank was as calm as ever. "There's still a chance, Jerry," he shouted. "There's no fire below. Grab these sheets and tear them up. We'll make a rope. If the fire stays back, we might be able to save the professor and ourselves. But we have to work fast. Chapter 3. Headed South. The boys worked hard. The smoke was getting thicker every second. They saw the stairs and knew the fire would soon cover the whole building. They needed to hurry. Each boy tore and tied sheets together. They made a long rope. It might break, but Frank hoped the sheets were strong. There was no time to test the rope. Frank tied it around the sleeping man under his arms. "Help me lift him over the window," Frank said. The boys lifted the man easily. He was small and light. They lowered him out of the window. Frank hoped the fire would not get worse. If it did, the man might be in danger. People outside were shouting. Many voices cheered as the man came down the rope. "I hope the rope is long enough," said Jerry. "Hurrah! They caught him. He's safe," Frank shouted as the man reached the ground. They had almost used all the rope. Frank tied the end to the bed. "Jerry, climb out and slide down. Hurry, or we might lose our chance," Frank said. Jerry wanted Frank to go first, but he knew Frank was right. He climbed out of the window and slid down. Frank waited until he thought Jerry was safe. The rope was strong, but it could not hold both of them at the same time. Then Frank saw fire below. The flames were close to the rope. "Come down, Frank, quick," he heard Will's voice shouting. The fire was very close to the rope. Frank did not hesitate. He slid down the rope fast. He passed the flames just as the rope started to burn. Frank was almost safe when he felt the rope break. He fell, but something caught him. It was the arms of his friends who had made a net. Frank was safe, but his hair was a little burned. The boys were happy to leave the crowd. They did not want to be carried around on people's shoulders. The man they saved thanked them. He said, "You saved my brother's life tonight. He works for the government with balloons and airplanes. He may help our country in a war. Tomorrow, he will thank you himself. Your mothers will be proud of you." The boys watched the hotel burn from a distance. They talked about it as if they were just watching, not involved. Yet 2 of them had risked their lives to save another. Bluff and Will were very worried while Frank and Jerry were inside. They cheered loudly when they saw the professor coming down the rope. The fire did not spread to other buildings. The firefighters worked hard to keep it under control. When the fire was out, the boys went home. They shook hands, showing how much they cared for each other. Frank and Jerry did not tell their parents about the rescue, but the next morning, the professor and his brother came to Frank's house. They told the whole story to Frank's father. Frank and Jerry blushed when they were praised. The professor said, "I'm going south too. It would be funny if we met again down there. I'm going to Atlanta with my balloon. If I can help you, I will." No one knew how strange their next meeting would be. All of Centerville heard about the boy's brave actions. Jerry's mother praised him, and his father was proud. Jerry felt uncomfortable with all the attention. "Any boy would have done the same," Jerry said. "We were just lucky to have the chance." By afternoon, the boys packed everything. They were ready and waited for the trip. "No sleep for me tonight," Jerry said. "You should try to sleep. Tomorrow night we will be on the train," Frank said. The boys knew about machines. Jerry had learned to drive a car, and Frank had learned about boat engines. "3 cheers for the Jessamine," Bluff said. The boys cheered loudly. That night they stayed with their families. They could not stop thinking about the fun ahead. They barely slept. Morning came with light snow. The boys gathered at the station. They were ready to travel south. As the train left, they waved goodbye to their friends and families. "Hurrah!" Bluff said as he sat down. "We're on our way to the greatest adventure of our lives." Chapter 4. Jerry meets trouble halfway. "Isn't she a beauty?" asked one of the boys. "It's the best thing ever on the water. We're going to live on her for 2 weeks." "We are so lucky," said Will. "I don't need cars or planes. Give me a nice motorboat. I wouldn't change places with King George." Frank said nothing but smiled. He was happy. He loved camping and cruising. He was excited to use the new boat. The boat was very modern. It had a hood in the front, like a car. The hood could cover the whole boat. When it was sunny, the hood could be pushed back. This would let the sunshine in. The boys traveled south without any problems. They stayed at a small hotel by the river. It was in northern Florida. The Gulf of Mexico was not far away. Jerry said he could smell the salt water. His friends laughed and said it was just the smell of the river mud. "I can't wait to see the Gulf," said Jerry. "I've always wanted to see it since I read about pirates there." "Listen to him," laughed Bluff. "He thinks he'll see old pirates like Blackbeard and Captain Kidd." "Maybe not old pirates, but there are still people who cheat and steal," Jerry said. "Jerry is right," said one of the boys. "Who knows what we will see? There are swamps with dangerous people hiding in them. We must be careful." "Frank knows a lot. He's been learning about this place since we got here," said Will. "He carried his camera everywhere. He loved taking pictures." "When do we start?" asked Bluff. He liked to cook and was checking the cooking equipment. "We are ready now," said Frank. "Let's go back to the hotel, pay the bill, and get the rest of our things. I have a map of the river. We will use it until we reach the Gulf." "And then?" asked Will. "The government maps will guide us from there. They show everything we need to know," said Frank. "Come on, Jerry and Bluff. Let's go." Will stayed with the boat while the others went back to the hotel. He sat in the sunshine and thought about home. He remembered the fun times he had with his camera. Soon, his friends came back with the rest of the supplies. They quickly packed the boat. Frank checked the engine and started it. He wanted to make sure it worked. "If something goes wrong, we can use poles to push the boat down the river," he said, laughing. "All aboard for the Gulf," called Will. He stood by the rail, watching Jerry untie the boat. The engine started, and the boat began to move. "Ready, Frank?" called Jerry. The engine made a cheerful sound. "I hope the boat works as well as it looks," said Frank. A minute later, Frank was happy. "Let her go, Jerry," he shouted. The motorboat moved down the river. Frank controlled the engine easily. "A good start," said Bluff. "I love the sea," sang Jerry. He climbed to the front of the boat to watch for any obstacles in the river. The river had many sharp turns. The current was fast, making it hard to steer. Frank was learning quickly. He watched everything carefully. Jerry sat on the front rail, enjoying the view. Will had his camera ready to take pictures. He wanted to capture the hanging Spanish moss on the trees. Frank told him to be patient. They would see plenty of moss later. Suddenly, the boat hit something hard. Frank turned off the engine quickly. Jerry flew over the rail and into the water with a big splash. He looked like a giant frog jumping into the river.